This is a trailer for Sensorium, a digital entertainment company that has created a virtual reality platform intended to be, quote, a spiritual and distinguished place for those who want to learn more about themselves, explore the inner world of their body, mind, and soul. Sensorium promises we will feel closer than ever to the people we love and the things we enjoy. Not by being in the actual presence of these people, but by becoming virtual beings, set free from earthly limitations. These ultra-realistic, AI-enabled avatars allow us to express ourselves with absolute freedom and can over time reach what they call digital immortality, autonomous creatures enabled with sophisticated AI tools that can live forever inside the metaverse. If a virtual reality platform like Sensorium seems far-fetched, imagine trying to explain to anyone living 100 years ago the glowing devices we hold in our pockets. Explain the magic of accessing millions of songs with just a touch or swipe, or how you can post or lurk on social media sites that keep you connected to people all around the world, or how you can be in one room controlling a light or a speaker in another room, as if we were all conjurers turning science fiction into reality. I belong to the last generation of Americans that will remember the world before the widespread use of the internet and smartphone. I've recently gone back and started typing up my high school journal from 25 years ago. And when I'm recounting a typical day, I'll sometimes say, I went online. That language sounds quaint now. Today, we only announce when we're going offline. Online is the default. Always connected. Always scrolling. There's a funny story in one of the journal entries. I ran out of gas on a main road in town, and a friend's father had to fill up my car enough so I could get to a gas station. Looking back, I'm surprised by how different the experience would be today. I had no smartphone back then, no way of contacting anyone. No one else did either. If my friend's father hadn't happened to pass by, I guess I would have had to walk to the nearest home or business to ask for a phone to call for help. Just a few years later, when my wife and my oldest son and I were leaving Romania and moving to the United States, we downloaded Skype so we could continue to keep in touch visually with my in-laws, who are Romanian. And I remember thinking even then, I belong to the last generation of cross-cultural missionaries to go for extended periods of time without visual contact with family members and friends back home. Digital technologies have woven a complex web that alters our perceptions and interactions. We think of ourselves differently now. We experience life differently than we did just 20 years ago. Some of you listening don't know the world I'm describing. For my kids, there's no before. For them, technology doesn't just connect us. It's a defining feature of life today. It shapes how we think, act, and even see ourselves. How does this shift, this digitization of the self, affect our understanding of what it means to be human, to live together? In this environment, spiritual formation will have to be, in some ways, counter-formation, an alternative to the digital habits and assumptions that form us often unthinkingly in machine-like dehumanizing ways. Renewal will require us to ask hard questions about who we've been, who we are, and who we're becoming. I'm Trevin Wax, Vice President of Resources and Marketing at the North American Mission Board. You're listening to Reconstructing Faith. In this series, we address different challenges facing the church today, offering perspective from church history and the global church, so that we are formed by the Spirit and strengthened for the tasks that lie ahead. I hope you'll join me on this journey and consider what you can contribute to the restoration and renewal of the witness of the people of God. This is the 7th episode of Season 3. I post, therefore I am.
Over the course of the mid-90s, late 90s, early 2000s, you were still sitting down to a computer. I think just phenomenologically, the experience of going online was coming to a place sitting in front of that thing and being anchored to that place as you were online.
This is Michael Sacasas, one of the best thinkers about technology, culture, and moral life in America today. He's the executive director of the Christian Study Center of Gainesville.
And so you were sitting down at a PC in a room, maybe you called it a computer room. Places had names like that, computer labs at a college maybe. And there was a real inflection point when the internet became mobile, right? Where you were untethered from a place and all of the functionality of the internet or internet-connected computer became accessible on a smartphone. I think that really inflected the experience of being online so that it did begin to feel as if it was just sort of the ubiquitous reality. And I think one of the salient points that sociologists made at the time is that even if, say, you construct some set of conditions under which we might say, okay, you're offline, right? You don't have a device on you. You're thinking about it, right? There's some way in which our experience of life has been impacted by the online realities, and they bleed over into our offline, if you like, experience or in real life experience. And certainly, it's all real life, right? But yes, I think by and large now we think of ourselves as being somehow tethered to this virtual reality, if you like, in ways that are pretty ubiquitous. That's important, right? That's an important shift in the human experience that we are obviously kind of struggling to make sense of and to figure out what a well-ordered relationship to these relatively new realities might be.
Well, I think it's illustrative of the shift because you're actually saying that it goes deeper than just that the default has changed. It's that we're actually conceiving of ourselves in relation to the line, whether we are online or offline. That's the thing that I don't think anyone in 1990 would have even conceived of. It's so ingrained in us now that we conceive of ourselves in relation to that digital technology.
So our relations now are digitized to the degree that they're mediated by digital technologies, right? So wherever we are, whatever I'm doing, right? My experience of a place, my experience of time, my experience of human interactions, to the degree that they are digitally mediated, and that digital mediation is now ubiquitous and pervasive, right? I think that is one way of sort of understanding this. It's all real. It's not about real or not real. We can maybe make some qualitative distinctions among the varieties of experience from virtual to not, right? I think there are some important things to be said about that. But we exist under sort of digital conditions to the degree that our relationships are mediated by digital structures, much the same way that we might say that as people transitioned into industrial age society, their relations to the land, the relationship to one another, the relationships to knowledge, all of these began to be mediated by industrial age institutions and tools. And it didn't just add a new component to already existing dynamics and structures. It restructured human experience. It restructured the way we relate to one another. And so likewise with our digital technologies.
I wanted to explore a little more what that restructuring of human experience in the digital era might look like. So I turned to Christine Rosen, whose most recent book, The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World, contrasts the human condition with what we now call the user experience.
So the human experience is something that I don't think we used to have to defend or explain. It just was, right? We didn't have an option. And by human experience, I mean we live in physical bodies bounded by time and space. And we also are finite creatures. Our bodies deteriorate with time. Our minds deteriorate with time. We have a limited span of life, although we have extended that in the recent past. But to be a human is to live with a recognition of those physical limits. To be a user of many of our incredible technologies now is to deny all those physical realities and instead have the kinds of experiences that are unbounded by physicality, by space, by time. And this is an amazing technological feat that humans have created for themselves. The question is, how do we think of ourselves if we start to spend, as we do now in many countries, and particularly here in the US, If we spend more of our time living lives as users on platforms, whether it be the web or through our smartphones, rather than embodied humans in our day-to-day lives bounded by physical space and time.
One of the ways the digital era has restructured our habits and perception is through the tools we now rely on for daily life. Christine uses the example of GPS, how it puts us in the center of the world and can lead to the loss of the human skill of understanding and navigating the terrain.
I think what's most important about using these incredibly powerful tools that offer us convenience, offer us efficiency, offer us a much more seamless, frictionless way of going about our daily lives, that's their promise, and many of them deliver that, is that it shifts how we understand our own powers and limitations. And by that, I mean, it turns us into little demigods. It puts us right at the center of every trip we take. But when we open those phones, every message that the platforms and apps that we use send us is, you are important and everything should be at your beck and call, on demand, as efficiently as possible. And if that doesn't happen as you go throughout your day, we should fix that, or something's gone wrong. But if you're a well-developed human being, part of what you have to learn, particularly if you care about the development and cultivation of character and virtue, is that lots of things won't go your way. You can't control everything. And so you have to learn to adapt and form habits of mind, judgments, character that will allow you to deal with those situations. Everything about the smartphone and our app-driven culture sends the opposite message to us constantly.
So I don't get the sense that neither you nor I are going to give up our GPS anytime soon. So is the solution to the problem you just laid out greater awareness of what this is doing, combined with some counterformative practices that will counteract that? So I just wonder, what's the solution if it's not giving it up completely?
So let's take GPS. That's a good example. We'll all continue to use it when we need to. I would challenge people to do a couple of things. Don't use it and get to know your immediate local area as well as possible, and go without the GPS when you're local if you can. Practice it, actually. It is a skill. Learn or relearn how to read a map and teach your children how to read maps. So one of my sons actually wanted to challenge himself this past summer, and he went off the grid National Outdoor Leadership School program for a month in Wyoming. But that experience of fear and anxiety and having to figure out where they were and map from one place to the other was so exhilarating for him and all the other kids in that group, who are all Gen Z kids raised with technology. It gave him a confidence and a skill set, and that can't be taken away from him. So if he does ever find himself lost, he won't panic. If his GPS goes out, he won't panic. He has some skills. And I think if we use this stuff when we feel we need it, but have an awareness that it is a tool but can become a crutch, and also cultivate some of the lost skills that I think we're too quick to discard, that will help us actually strike a better balance.
It's one thing for digital technologies to reshape how we navigate the physical world, but it's another thing to see apps today that track and manage our relationships based on heart rate monitoring. Apps that recommend cutting people out of your life based on how they make you feel. What does it look like when we outsource the management of our emotions in relationships?
The problem now is that we tend to trust an algorithm or a chatbot more than we trust ourselves. So my question was, okay, how did we get to this place? Why is it that we don't trust our own emotional intuitions? Part of it is a sort of, again, this kind of engineering mindset of humans have all these problems. This is one of those areas where technology and the technological fix-it efficient mindset have encroached into something where it has no place. We need to understand ourselves as human beings, as individuals, what our emotions mean, how to control them, how to express them in a healthy way, and also in relation to each other. There isn't an app for that. There never should be an app for that. Humans have to figure each other out. And we are inefficient, self-delusional, misguided, and quirky and weird. But you know what? That's what makes us human. That's what makes us special. So one of the things that worries me, particularly again for younger generations, is this idea that human relationships should be seamless and efficient in the same way that getting your DoorDash order to your front door is seamless and efficient. No, human relationships are difficult for a reason because we all have our own needs and wants, and figuring out what another person needs and wants is part of your responsibility to other human beings. So I think that these technologies and these apps promise the removal of that responsibility, the outsourcing of it to a machine or to an algorithm. And that is a moral wrong.
Well, what concerns me is just the after effects. If that were to catch on and be widely used in our society, it would lead to the infantilizing of all relationships. Because, I mean, basically, we would lose the capacity to deal with difficult people, to deal with ourselves or with the people closest to us whenever they're difficult. I mean, if you remove everyone out of your life that causes some kind of challenge or discomfort to you, then you eventually lose the capacity to build relationships at all. Because every close relationship, like it becomes even more isolating. At the end of the day, that's going to backfire.
And these apps and sort of technological approaches to these issues are coming after decades and decades of a therapeutic culture that has told people that if someone is toxic, for example, you must cut them out of your life. Or, you must have boundaries that remove from your presence anyone who doesn't understand your need for peace and constant calm. These are very Manichaean ways of approaching the quandaries of human nature. And I think it is worrisome for that reason.
It's interesting that Christine called this approach to relationships Manichaean. That's a reference to a worldview that Augustine once embraced before his conversion. It divides life into stark categories of good and evil with no middle ground, much like today's tendency to adopt a black and white approach to relationships, toxic or safe, helpful or harmful. Relationships are never that simple. But this is one way the digital world restructures our expectations. There's another element of our digital era that interests me. This reality where everything is tracked and quantified. Our steps, our sleep, our spending. Apps push us to optimize, to collect streaks and points. Did you get your 10,000 steps? Check off your Bible reading plan? Complete your Duolingo lesson? Even something as personal as sleep has become a number to improve. I wanted to ask Michael Sakassis about this relentless focus on metrics, how it reshapes how we see ourselves and the world, emphasizing what can be counted over what cannot.
So the trend to quantifying, right? I think we might characterize it broadly as a modern imperative, right? A modern way of knowing. And I think this is one of the things I would want to draw out about this, is that it does become a way of knowing what is real, knowing what is important, what we quantify. If our attention is drawn to what is quantifiable, that's going to imply that we get to know the world in a certain way, or we're going to get to know certain dimensions of the world, maybe more precisely, but it's going to also delimit our ways of knowing the world. It's going to maybe eclipse other qualitative forms of experience or forms of knowledge. Analyzing is literally breaking down a task into movements and then literally quantifying that and seeing if we can improve the timing of these movements to yield more efficient production, right? So the stopwatch enables this. You can even push that further, like our ability to say something like, I'll meet you at 9:15 kind of presupposes a precision, widely available mode of precisely quantifying time, right? So time now is, the mechanical clock allows us to conceive of it differently than we would have otherwise. So there's this tradition of measuring, of striving to quantify, to capture data. And so that, the one thing I want to say about that again is that it's a mode of perception. Right? And so I think we have to, it has its benefits. I wouldn't want to say that we should never quantify anything, obviously, but we have to recognize that that implies a way of perceiving that also is a way of not perceiving, right? It entails certain ways of missing a fuller, richer, more diverse experience of the world. So there's that. The other part I would want to emphasize here is, what's the underlying impulse, right? Is there something, are we just quantifying for the sake of quantification, or is there an underlying impulse?
Michael reminded me of the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa, who describes modernity's underlying drive as the quest to bring the world under control. In his book, The Uncontrollability of the World, he argues that rationalizing and quantifying our experiences are central to this effort. Quantification, he explains, gives us tools to measure, predict, and optimize, creating the illusion of control. Levers we believe we can pull to manage and shape our reality.
So why would you track your sleep? Well, it's so that you can optimize your sleep patterns. Why would you track your steps? It's so you can optimize your health, right? The underlying promise of quantification is that you're going to be able to get a grip on reality and bring it further under your control. Then we have to question, well, why do I want to bring things under control? What is that suggesting about my relation to the world, my relation to experience? How amenable is that to a Christian way of being in the world, where we're invited to fundamentally, I would argue, receive the world as a gift and not perceive it as sort of a field for the exercise of our will and a realm for our mastery for the sake of our own realization of our desires.
The problem with this tendency, as Hartmut Rosa sees it, is that once we do this to the world, once we try to make the world controllable at every level, accessible, manageable, and useful, we begin to see the world as a series of objects that we are to know, attain, conquer, master, or exploit. And this actually kills wonder in the world. It leads us to experience what Max Weber called disenchantment, the experience of feeling alive, of truly encountering the world, what Rosa calls resonance. That eludes us. The world becomes a dead thing we act upon, not something that can call out to us or lead us to that feeling of wonder and awe. Up to this point, we've seen how digital technologies change how we navigate our environment, change how we see ourselves and relate to others, and change how we imagine life. It's now something we can quantify and control. But what happens when these same patterns creep into the church? What does this new self-perception mean for our relationship with God? How does the digital age shape, inform, or deform our understanding of discipleship and spiritual growth? We'll be right back.
Got a front row seat to the madness. I pick up my phone every morning out of habit. I've been fiending for the drama, yeah, I said it. I'm addicted to the rush, need a medic. When I take a step back, I can see it. All the pain, all the fear we've been feeling. Losing sight of the thing that we're needing, that we're needing. Honestly, I think we just need Jesus. Honestly, I think we just need Jesus. Have we all gone mad? Have we lost our minds? What used to be wrong, we say that is right. Honestly, I think we just need Jesus.
In thinking through the way the digital revolution is shaping and reshaping us, it's important for us to take these elements that we've looked at, the formation of user experience as a way of avoiding normal human friction and frustration, the shift away from face-to-face relationships toward isolating technologies, and the quantification of everything in terms we can measure and control, and now ask how they affect us as Christians, how they affect the church. I asked Samuel James, author of Digital Liturgies, about what he sees in church life today.
Overall, I am mostly encouraged by what I've seen speaking to Christians and speaking to church groups about this. I was very encouraged by the amount of people who were very eager to kind of learn more about the ways that technology shapes us, and we're very sensitive to it. I think there is going to be a resistance to the smartphone that is coming for a lot of Christians. I think people are going to find that they are out of the loop with the way that many churches have simply adopted kind of social media centric ways of communication. I think one other example of this that probably goes a little bit closer to what you're asking is the ways in which I think a lot of younger people in the church in particular are coming into the church and they simply don't know the skill of relationship. They don't know the art of communication. They don't know how to really approach someone and establish that relationship. The art of small talk is being lost. So people feel awkward going up to someone that they don't know because it's like, what do I say? And actually, a lot of younger people simply don't know how to do that. And I think partly that's because social media's curation effect has kind of brought us people that we don't have to kind of, we call icebreakers. We don't have to break the ice with because it's brought directly to us. We pick it from a list of recommended feeds. And so the art of actually getting to know people, not necessarily the art of having deep relationships with people you already know, which in a sense is almost easier in our culture than actually initiating new relationships because many people simply don't have the skills to do that. That is another dynamic that I see a lot of Christians struggling with. And I think it, particularly with younger Christians who are more digital natives than older generations, the problem becomes acute very quickly.
It's interesting. You talked about churches that are trying to communicate to people through social media feeds. And there's two ways of looking at that. I mean, one way of looking at that is 80 to 90% of our church members are on Facebook already, or they're on X, or they're on whatever, or Instagram. So we want to be present where they already are in an online space. And so part of that is we're going to make some announcements or do some communication or some recaps or whatever in those areas because we already know people are there.
I do think that Christians need to be thinking in terms of how do we kind of chase this demographic that's really on the site, but also how do we actually captivate their attention? And what many people need to realize is that these social media apps are not meant to captivate people's attention. It's meant to spread their attention thin so that you give something the minimal amount of thought, you give it the minimal amount of consideration, and then you bounce onto the next thing. And that's actually a pretty dangerous dynamic to introduce to a church's like kind of gospel messaging strategy. If you're putting your stuff on TikTok, that user sees, oh, here's a 10-second gospel encouragement from the Psalms. Okay, swipe. Here's someone doing a silly dance. Swipe. Here's this kind of odd video about mental health. And so it creates this context collapse where everything around the gospel content is kind of anti-gospel content. And it yields this unseriousness to the gospel content.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say that there's something to Neil Postman's critique of television and certainly in Instagram, TikTok, Twitter scrolling, it's context collapse across the board. But wouldn't you say that's also the case for Christians 2,000 years who have sought to preach the gospel in the public marketplace? I mean, if you think about it, you've got this person's hawking these wares, this person's selling an idol, this person's asking for alms, you've got a beggar, this person's, if you think about Paul walking through the streets of Ephesus, or you think about at Mars Hill, at the Areopagus, I think Christians have always been in places where their voices are part of a cacophony of other voices, to which you could say, well, that's context collapse. You've got Paul and Peter right here, but then you look over here and you've got this person, and then this person is saying something else, and this person's doing that. And so, at some point, isn't that just an always a critique of how the gospel gets into a place?
I think that's true in a version. So I think there is a version of context collapse that happens, but the difference is you're talking about embodied environments, and we're talking about disembodied environments with social media and the internet. And I think that makes a huge difference. I think a person can go through a town square where someone is selling jewelry, someone is selling meat, someone is handing out literature, and there is kind of that context collapse and cacophony, like you said. But with embodied presence, there is a way to kind of station yourself in front of this one particular person, to pay attention to this one particular presentation. Open air preaching has a long tradition in the church. It's not always the most effective type of preaching, but it has been incredibly effective throughout history. And there's a reason for that, is that it is possible, particularly in an embodied environment, to shift your attention. And I think the more disembodied experience we're talking about, the less well, I'll just say the more difficult it is to actually do that, because you're talking about seconds, not minutes. You're talking about swiping, not physically going from one place to the other. And I think with our bodies, we carry a higher capacity for attention amidst the cacophony.
Samuel makes a good point about the difference between attention in a digital environment and attention in a physical environment. This brings up the question of physical presence in church life. There's a fascinating verse in the second letter of John at the end of the New Testament where he writes, "Though I have many things to write to you, I don't want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete." As wonderful as technologies may be, including paper and ink, that connect us beyond space and time, it's the face-to-face interaction that still matters most, especially for church.
Part of what the requirements of being a member of a spiritual community are the responsibilities to that community, and many of those can only happen in person, face-to-face.
This is Christine Rosen again.
So unless you have a serious disability or a geographical challenge that makes it impossible to find a church, I would say it's incumbent on people of faith to find those communities and to be active in them in person. And that's because we are wired to see each other and to react to each other and to really understand and empathize with each other by looking at each other's whole bodies, not just the face. But all of history and many religious texts talk about, look, in the Bible, seeking the face of God. You know, there's a reason Roman emperors put their faces on every coin. I mean, the human face is a very powerful thing for a reason. We are designed to understand each other by looking at each other. Every faith has these traditions that are bounded in some way by our physicality and also very humble about it, right? And if we easily dismiss those, then we're making a choice for convenience over community. So you're part of the community, but a little distant from it. So what does that mean for the people who actually got up and drove to church? How do they feel about you and vice versa? How does that change the dynamics of your community? I think if we start to err on the side of mediating our communities in that way, choosing the convenient path, we are undermining some of the most important values of those communities. And we're kind of doing it unthinkingly because we think we're expanding the community by allowing more people to watch a service online, for example. And you are, but you're also changing the quality of that worship.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we talk about convenience over community. I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that we don't think of ourselves as blessing other people with our physical presence. We think of ourselves, I think, just because we live in a consumer society, not just a social media-driven society, we see ourselves as consumers who are going for religious goods and services.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. It also reminds us that that sort of efficiency and consumer-driven way of approaching faith means that we will miss, I like how you put that, the gift of our own presence and what it brings to others. So our ability to actually observe and support others is diminished by not being in their physical presence. There are things we will miss if we don't see, even people who we see regularly, if we don't interact with them face to face.
So you talk about the phone's ability to keep us distracted or help us avoid boredom no matter what situation we're in, even waiting in line. I just wonder if you could speak a little more to the practice of waiting and especially how you would counsel Christian churchgoers in this era, especially considering how waiting, silence, listening, I mean, those have been time-tested, quote unquote, inefficient disciplines of the spiritual life.
So waiting, we don't wait the way we used to. In fact, I think for a lot of people, they've lost the ability to even know how to wait. And by that, I don't mean to be one of those people who valorizes boredom or says, this is good for you. So you just have to buckle down and be absolutely patient because it's good for you. No, I mean, we have now the option of filling every interstitial moment of time, whether it's 2 minutes or 20, with entertainment, with connection to people we already know. Doesn't matter if you're standing in line at Disney World or you're waiting for the bus or you're sitting in church waiting for the service to start and people are checking their email or texting. So because we have the option, we often choose it. So what does that mean? That means when we're placed in situations where we must wait without stimulation or entertainment, we have a much harder time doing it, because learning patience is a habit. It's a virtue for a reason, right? We have to practice it. We have to teach our children what it means to sit still for a few minutes and just be with your own thoughts, to be comfortable in that position. We've been habituated into an idea and a culture that tells us, A, we shouldn't ever have to wait, and B, it's a problem to be solved if you find yourself in a situation where you have to wait. And neither of those things is actually true, because as you say, as many people of faith will acknowledge, waiting is part of the practice of being a spiritual person. The experiment I ask people to do is go one day where in interstitial moments where you're forced to wait or at a stoplight or whatnot, you don't pick up your phone. You will not touch that smartphone. And see what you notice about your day. See what you notice about what other people are doing, what you hear, what you're aware of that you weren't. And it's really fascinating. I did it myself many times. I still do. This is a sort of habit I've developed. It's great. You actually notice your mind wandering. You notice you're bored. You notice there are some really rude people in the world too, but you're noticing, you're open to experience in a way that when you pick up that phone in every moment, you close yourself off to those experiences.
Waiting without distraction feels almost revolutionary in a world that prizes instant gratification. But the discipline of waiting, of being fully present, isn't just countercultural. It's deeply spiritual. But even in the church, there's a temptation to avoid waiting, or to approach spiritual growth as if it were just another optimization project, another set of metrics to track, another box to check. Michael Sakasa spoke to me about this tendency.
So are we thinking of discipleship as one species of the family of optimization, right? We will optimize our Christian life in the same way that I might optimize revenue for my business or optimize my workout regime to give me the kind of gains that I'm looking for with regards to my physical health. Is the spiritual life, is it susceptible to that kind of approach, that kind of mentality? I may not use this language explicitly, or maybe I would in some cases, but I'm looking for the right method, right? The right spiritual method to achieve a set of desired goals, understood analogously to how I would look for the right methods to, again, optimize business growth or optimize physical growth. And needless to say, I don't think the spiritual life kind of works that way, right? It doesn't yield to that kind of rationality. And so it might lead to a great deal of frustration. I think ultimately it leads to the eclipse of grace, right? Because grace is gift. And so we may, in more Protestant context, immediately sort of think of salvation as a gift of God's grace. But I want to think too about how all of our experience can be characterized by grace. That is to say that fundamentally we live in a gifted world, right? We live in a world that is fundamentally a gift from God. It is received, even if it should be at all managed, or we set upon it to master it, right? Before any of that, it is primarily a gift. And so any mode of thought, any way of relating to the world that positions us in such a manner that what we are looking for, even if just tacitly, is, again, control, efficiency, optimization, maximizing of resources towards the ends that we predetermine, all of that tends to preclude and exclude the operations of grace, right? It doesn't allow for how God may mysteriously work in our own circumstances, often contrary to our own intentions and plans. It puts us, I think, in a place of desiring, mastering control, where we should be in a place of receiving and listening. I think of, spiritual practices like silence and solitude, for example. It would be hard to attempt to measure those, right? To quantify them and to show progress along easily demonstrable metrics. But I think they're essential to the Christian life, right? I think there are all sorts of questions along those lines where I suppose part of what we want to think of is that there are packages of technologies that are not neutral. They come with assumptions. They shape our perception. They incline us to see the world and our experience in certain ways. And they arise out of certain contexts that are driven by economic rationality. They're driven by motives that are not necessarily geared towards spiritual health, spiritual well-being. And so to just import them into ecclesial contexts, import them into our faith and our spiritual life without asking very serious questions about what comes with them, right? How they begin to shape us. I think that can be very dangerous, honestly.
As we navigate an era where digital technology dominates our habits and social interactions, it's not just a question of how we live online. It's about how these tools press on deeper questions. What does it mean to be human? What are we for? How do our online habits reshape our understanding of ourselves and our purpose?
When we start with a Christian anthropology, we start with the fact that we are embodied creatures who reflect the image of God.
This is Samuel James again.
The Bible talks about the image of God not simply in abstract terms, but it talks about the image of God as consisting in maleness and femaleness. So in the image of God, he created them male and female, meaning that the image of God encompasses not simply the immaterial part of us, but also in some mysterious way, the male and female part of us, the physical part of us. And so there is a sense in which our maleness and our femaleness, this physical part of ourselves, is part of what it means to be made in the image of God. I'm still just kind of mining that and trying to figure out like what all does that mean. But I think one of the implications of that for kind of our current moment is that the further we get from a pace of life, from habits, from a way of thinking about ourselves, the further we get away from that frames us as embodied people, we're actually losing more than our attention spans or our emotional health. We're actually losing something spiritually. Because when we don't think of ourselves as embodied people, when we think of ourselves as just minds that can kind of navigate and create anything, then we actually lose part of what it means, part of what the Bible says, that we're made in the image of God. We lose contact with that. So I think the implication of that is that what the internet and what digital technology does is that it just teaches us to feel that we are less than the image of God. I think that is why when we get done binging on social media, when we finally stop doom scrolling, we come away with this sense that like nothing matters. We come away with this sense of despair and of frustration. And I think it's because we forget in that moment who we are. We forget where we come from. We forget that we actually have a divine origin story. And I think that's partly the reason for this despair, for this depression, for this frustration with life that many people have. I think the present crisis that we have of despair and purposelessness is deeply connected to the anthropological implications of simply being online creatures who are not using our creativity, not using our physical self, but are simply passively consuming information.
We're talking this season a lot about spiritual formation and about if we're hoping to be part of the solution in contributing to the restoration and the renewal of the church in the generation ahead, we've got to ask the question, are we even capable of contributing to that renewal? Are we substantive enough as people of substance enough in a superficial world? Or do we have the spiritual muscles we even need to be able to help rebuild the witness of the church in the next generation?
I think the place I would start, and the place I did start with my own life, was to say, when you go on these digital apps, what are you hoping happens? So kind of diagnose the heart issue. So it is a question of desire. What are you hoping happens? So for me, it was that desire to be seen. For someone else, it might be a desire to forget. When I get on the app, all I want to do is scroll so that I don't have to think about this job that's weighing me down. I don't want to have to think about this relationship that's difficult. I don't want to have to think about everything I have to do tomorrow. It's I want to forget. So there's the consumptive and a passive element to it. And this will just depend on the individual person, right? And so for people who really want to help the church, for people who really want to be spiritually healthy going forward in a digital age, you have to diagnose what's your particular desire. What are you coming to technology for? And then you need to say, well, actually, the Bible has a cure for this. The Bible has a way to fulfill this need. And it's actually, it's people, it's relationship, it's belonging, it's conversation, it's getting together. It's really that simple. Like, it's not this incredibly complex kind of life philosophy that you have to execute at a very high level. It's desires. It's the same, it's, habits of the heart. It's the same stuff that goes on in every generation with every technology, no matter what it is. So yeah, I think that's what I would say to anyone who wants to flourish going forward on behalf of the kingdom, is to diagnose what it is your heart is looking for when you get online, and then find in God's people and in God's word that thing that's actually going to connect you with your real self.
Grace doesn't fit neatly into an app. It can't be measured or optimized. It's a gift, unexpected, unearned, and often inconvenient. And perhaps that's the point. The spiritual life isn't about mastering our environment. It's about receiving all of life as a gift. But what does that look like in practice? How do we develop the spiritual muscles we need to resist the pull of superficiality and live as people of substance? We'll be right back. Waiting, patience, stillness. In a world built on the idea that faster is better, the act of pausing, of resisting the relentless pull of our devices and distractions, seems countercultural. And yet, the call to wait is one of the oldest and most profound invitations in the Christian life. As we've seen, the digital age doesn't just demand our attention, it shapes it. It rewires our habits, reframes our priorities, and often leaves us feeling more fragmented than whole. The question isn't just how we live online, it's how we resist being deformed by it. I asked my guests for their final thoughts on cultivating the kind of virtues and habits that push back against the superficiality of our age.
The one thing I would encourage people to do is to revive as positive ideas about character building, virtue education. We all want to be very tolerant. But when it comes to cultivating healthy habits of mind and good character, we have to discern the good from the bad. And we have to say, this is going to be a formative habit to create a fully flourishing human being. If you're talking about how to raise kids. And we know some stuff that's harmful and we know some stuff that works. So I think we need to be a little more courageous about saying, yes, we do want to cultivate habits of mind that help people flourish. And that means saying it's better for character and judgment if you teach a young child how to be patient without sticking an iPad in their hands, or that they will sometimes feel awkward and uncomfortable and have to sit with that feeling and really figure it out. These are really transformative and necessary, although mundane, human experiences. And we now have to choose to do those on a daily basis and to raise children who know how to sit with their feelings, because the world is against that. The world actually wants everything to be easier because it suits the sort of engineering mindset of how we should live. I think history, faith have taught us some very good ways to live, and we shouldn't shy from embracing those even in the 21st century.
I think the church should be in the business of, Francis Schaeffer has this wonderful expression in one of his books called substantial healing to the whole person. And I think that is a beautiful phrase in the digital age. That's the church's primary focus, is on bringing the gospel's healing power to the whole person. And by whole person, we mean body and soul. We're not just talking to minds. We're not just talking to avatars. We're not just trying to kind of broadcast our message so that people can passively consume it whenever they want, but we are interested in ministering to the whole person. But I think you have to start there.
The impulse is to initially focus on the restrictions and on the renunciations. And I think there is a place for that, right? I think renunciation can be a powerful spiritual discipline. There's a biblical resource, theological resources to help us understand that ease and convenience and flexibility and comfort, these are not the ends that we ought to pursue for their own sake. Right? I think part of the task before us is to adequately picture the beauty and richness of the good life and of human flourishing as understood within the Christian tradition. Right? To compellingly hold up the beautiful thing that is, at its best, the life of the church, the life in communion with God and with brothers and sisters in Christ, and then say, okay, this beautiful thing we desire, this thing that we acknowledge as being not just beautiful, but good and true. And I think we may assent to its truth. We may, to some degree, say we know this is good. But I think that somehow making it beautiful is the part that has been lacking. And so we tend to focus on the things that we feel are wrong, or the criticism. It's very easy to sort of critique the things in the world that are not functioning as they should. But to make the good beautiful, right? This is the challenge for the pastor, for the pastoral staff, to capture the goodness of human community, the community of the church, in such a way that then I am willing to say, I see that this practice in my life, this technological reality in my life, is undermining or is not conducive to the achievement, the realization of that beautiful community that I long for. I realize that I need to put certain limits or constrain or think differently about this. This thing is inhibiting my pursuit of the beautiful community. And so that reordering our loves, right, in such a way that we recognize these more disordered relationships with our devices and our broader technological culture as a problem that we need to overcome, rather than as an inevitable function of life.
Michael Sakasas brought up a phrase in the opening chapters of John's Gospel. Come and see. What we're talking about here is not merely an argument to win, though reason has its place. It's an invitation into a way of life, a new community. And for that invitation to mean something, we must embody it. We must offer a glimpse of the goodness of what we found. This means creating spaces within our congregations where the beauty of true community can flourish, where the invitation isn't hollow, but rooted in a shared life that reflects God's grace. We have the opportunity to create pockets of resistance, places where humanity is restored, where connection is embodied, where grace interrupts the endless cycles of optimization and distraction. These pockets may seem small: a conversation without a phone, a church service free from screens, a moment of stillness in the chaos. But they carry immense power. They remind us who we are. Not cogs in a digital economy, but image bearers of a God who invites us to live fully, to love deeply, and to embrace the gift of being human. If the world around us feels dehumanizing, then let the church be a place where humanity flourishes. People are starving for this kind of connection, craving it to such a degree that even the faintest taste of the real thing, a place where they are seen, known, understood, and helped, feels like a profound relief. The smallest expression of genuine community, rooted in Christ's love, can satisfy a longing that words alone cannot. And when people encounter it, they won't just hear the call to come and see. They'll feel it. They'll know it. And they'll respond. Next time on Reconstructing Faith.
Yeah, one, I think you have to develop a robust theology of suffering and how hardship, and I call it the ministry of absorption, relates to ministry leadership and pastoral leadership in specific forms, so that you're not surprised that this is happening, like something unusual is taking place. This is what happens.
Reconstructing Faith is a podcast powered by the North American Mission Board. In an upcoming episode, we may respond to comments or questions from listeners. You can participate by giving us feedback at resources@namb.net. That's resources@namb.net. If this podcast is helpful to you, it would be helpful to us if you'd leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to and share it with your friends. If you'd like more resources from me, you can sign up for my email newsletter by checking out the show notes. Reconstructing Faith is written by Trevin Wax. Our show is produced and edited by Scott Slusher. Our sound design is composed, mixed, and mastered by Dan Phelps. Aaron Leslie handles audio editing and engineering. Story editing and consulting is by Amy Patrick. Until next time.